Like at what point does no one buy software anymore? Everyone's building everything themselves. He basically said that like the code you write in the next 12 months may be some of the last code you ever write.
I could just build this myself, but I know that the level of complexity that I want to do is going to be too complicated.
Will the point solution model survive in 10 years, or will everything have to be
So I do still think like riches are in the niches is still true. I think the question is like you just have to figure out what the level of complexity is where it actually makes sense to buy something versus build it.
Welcome back to Humans Talking Agents. Today I wanted to talk about a tweet that I saw from Jason Lemkin. So he's the founder of SaaStr, which is a big online publication conference. It's essentially the world's largest like B2B SaaS conference. And he also, runs a company that runs this conference. Apparently makes like $20 million a year. So it's big enough business. And he says, Cursor and Windsurf will write half my code or even more for just $20 a month. And you want to charge me $2 to close each trouble ticket with AI? Let's see if that lasts. So there's two things I want to chat about here. I mean, one is the whole concept of vibe coding, which is what he's kind of chatting about with Windsurf and Cursor. These are the two most popular tools for sort of vibe coding. And then the second thing I want to chat about is the whole, $2 to close each trouble ticket. It's a new AI pricing model, right? Resolution-based pricing. So I want to chat about both of them. But first, you've done a little bit of vibe coding yourself. What is vibe coding?
Yeah, so I mean, vibe coding, if you haven't used, there's tons of tools like Replit Agent, Windsurf. I think Cursor is a bit farther on like the dev spectrum that basically allow you to create apps yourself by just typing in natural language. And honestly, every day there's a new one that pops up, and they're getting better and better and better to the point where like I know people who are creating like full-on applications that are like used by multiple people just straight up in Replit Agent without touching a line of code. I'm sure you see it on Twitter, people creating like games that are used by multiple people by just kind of typing in natural language. And so it's kind of crazy to see, but I think the biggest thing that it points to is that the floor for what's considered software that someone would pay for, I think is rising pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
And like my take on this is that when it comes to like this resolution-based pricing, like it started off cool, but I think it's going to die pretty fast because things that are simple enough to price based on resolution are probably going to be the first things to get fully automated by personal software.
The classic phrase in like B2B SaaS land is always build versus buy, right? And what that means is like, are you going to buy software that does the thing for you, or are you going to build it yourself? And historically, most people kind of meme on like the whole build it yourself notion because, we know this from Voiceflow. So much of the work is like the cloud infrastructure. It's like the customer support. It's the maintenance, right? Like every line of code you write is a line of debt because you have to keep maintaining that code. So as your code base gets larger and larger, you require a bigger and bigger team. So most people would just go ahead and buy software that did it all for them, right? It ended up being a lower total cost of ownership than building it yourself. But the whole concept of like vibe coding, it's starting to change the equation a bit, right? Like if you can just build this little workflow automation or whatever app it is, if you can just build that, you don't need to buy software anymore. And how do the existing softwares survive in that model? Do they have to charge less? Which means they have to get more customers in order to make the same amount of money? Like it completely changes up SaaS.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on like where the line is, right? Because I think right now it's really good for personal software. So I think that's where it honestly will start, like things that you yourself need.
Have you built it? Have you vibe coded any personal software?
Yeah. I mean, I have a bunch of like, there's like automations that I've built like on my phone or on the computer. Building one right now that'll just like transcribe all my text and import it in, like formatted and imported into like Slack so I don't have to type again. But for example, like that one, there's like a number of companies that do that, right?
Yeah.
And they're all charging whatever dollars a month now. But like I'm like, this is kind of, I feel like this is simple enough that I can create it.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think like the question is I feel like there's a lot of kind of like micro SaaS or micro software that targets like a very specific problem or a small problem that everyone faces on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
That's like the first thing that'll kind of get automated because now you can build something like that yourself with minimal code. And then I think there's the next level, which is like, okay, for your business, there's all of these like small problems as well that you need to fix or automate.
Is there a line where it stops? Like at what point does no one buy software anymore?
Yeah.
Everyone's building everything themselves.
Well, that's where I think it stops. There's going to be like a complexity level that it stops at. So for right now, right, like being able to build an agent, like an AI chat agent that looks up information from knowledge base and answers questions used to be like, by used to, I mean like a year ago,
Yeah,
6 months ago.
Well, that's ages ago in
Yeah.
AI land.
It used to be like a crazy thing, right?
Yeah.
But now it's like you can literally do this yourself so easily, which is why there's like a billion companies that are now doing this, and there's a new one that pops up every day because they're so easy to create.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, you know, you went from like something like, let's say, an intercom that like offers this and was charging whatever $1 a resolution to now it's like, okay, if you want to build this yourself, it's actually fairly easy to do. Now, there's other things on top of this, right? Like now you want to start adding a lot of conditional logic, business logic. You want to start integrating with other tools. Like now it starts to get a bit more complex where you could probably still do it, but you need to actually put a little bit more effort into it.
Do you know what's funny though is the like dollar or $2 per resolution, which is what Jason was chatting about. That price point's still an amazing ROI. That's the funny thing. Like if a ticket, for some companies, an L1 ticket, like a level 1 sort of base ticket, might cost them $6-7 to solve, right, with human time. So you're getting a 3-to-1 ROI on that. For like an L2 or an L3 ticket, we have customers where, at Voiceflow, it's like $100. I'm not joking. Like you probably know the one I'm chatting about. And if you can solve it for $2, it's a 50 times ROI, right? But that's the funny thing is, even though the ROI statement makes sense from a sales standpoint, now there's this sort of other side of the equation, which is, well, can I get that same ROI, but even better because I'll just build it myself?
Yeah, and
right. Which wasn't the case at all like a couple of years ago.
And that's what people are doing, right? Like as we're talking to people as well, and just from like my own personal experience with people that are coming to Voice, so a lot of them are coming from like a homegrown solution that they've built that they've now outgrown, or they're coming from a tool like this because they're like, well, I could just build this myself, but I know that the level of complexity that I want to do is going to be too complicated. And so that's where, like, again, like it's that line. I think that line has jumped up really quickly over the past year. I think it'll continue to inch up, but I think the level of growth that it will have will slow a lot.
Even the Anthropic CEO recently, he was giving a talk. He basically said that like the code you write in the next 12 months may be some of the last code you ever write. Now, I think that's a big, bold statement, but I think it's directionally correct. Like the amount of code people are going to be writing is just going to continue to go down. Or the inverse of that is you just have more people coding, and like true software engineers are just going to move to a different part of the stack. But like they're still going to be doing the same amount of coding. Like it could easily go either way or both ways at once.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely an overstatement. Like, I don't think people will not write code again after this year, after the next 12 months.
I mean, that's like the Silicon Valley CEO thing. Like,
yeah, 100%.
You throw out a crazy, audacious goalpost. Like Elon Musk does this all the time. He's like usually correct, but he might be 10 years off.
But I think the reality is that, like, again, it's if you put the amount of like improvements on a like growth chart, right?
Yeah.
GPT 3.5 or GPT 3 to 3.5 is a pretty good, like pretty sizable improvement.
Yeah.
3.5 to 4 mini, like again, pretty sizable improvement, but again, not as much as it was in previous models. And so with a lot of these models too, like again, I think that like the amount of incremental change we're going to see with like each new model release is going to be smaller and smaller. And so when it comes to actually building some of these like complex softwares or complex systems, I think there's going to be a line in which it starts to get a bit blurry, where like below this line is going to be very easy to create. And then above this line is actually going to be still hard to create, maybe easier than it was before, but you're still going to need extra time and resources to go and like make that thing.
Yeah, I think what's deceiving a lot of people, like I try to build stuff on weekends and like test out new softwares and all that, and it can handle a small code base really well, like vibe coding. You can get to like 80% of a pretty complex project super quickly. The last 20%, bug fixes, adding tests, like it is painful. And so I think you're probably right that the floor is going to continue to move up slowly though. But it gives people this feeling of like, hey, we're going to do a build versus buy. And we're going to choose to build it ourselves because look, like engineer X put together a prototype that's like half of what we want in like an hour. So imagine what we can do in the next 5 hours, right? Yeah. But then you realize there's actually, it's like a logarithmic slope in that you make a lot of progress and then it's just painful the more progress you try to make. And at a certain point, there's just this like, there's this plane of complexity that the AI cannot handle. And that's actually, the whole reason that solutions exist, right? You have to keep doing that.
And I think this is where this line is, right? Like, what are those use cases where that 80% is actually good enough versus you actually really need that 20%? And so I think a very good example was, I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago, there was this competition on Twitter between a like really good Webflow designer and then someone who was building a website on lovable.dev.
What is Webflow? I know Webflow. You know Webflow.
Webflow is just like probably the best website creator that exists. It's like you can create. If you see any website where you're like, holy shit, how did they make this? They probably use Webflow.
Shout out Vlad and team over there.
And so, and on the other hand, lovable.dev is a software that allows you, again, to do kind of vibe coding. You can type in text, and it builds a lot of the code out for you. And so the competition was who can build a better website from a prompt. It was a classic kind of design competition. You know, the two people had like, I think it was like an hour or something to design it. And on one hand, you had, you know, really experienced Webflow designer, and on the other hand, you had someone who's pretty good at lovable.dev, not a designer by trade, but they were just typing in as building the website. And at the end of it, you know, the websites you compare side by side, the Webflow one was like definitely better, but the lovable.dev one like kind of got 80% of the way there.
Yeah.
But when it came to a website, right, like there was a lot of complexities and I think different states that like that 20% really mattered. And this was for like a more complex website, right? But if you're talking about like a landing page,
scalability too, right? Like of that website, like we're talking, you know, Webflow has built in so much stuff to do like, you know, reusable components, right? Hey, I want to have a reusable footer component. Lovable probably just, you know, when I use Anthropic to do like, you know, quote unquote vibe coding for like concepts and stuff, it bangs out just like raw JavaScript and sorry, raw HTML code.
But this was the thing.
It's not super. It's not component.
But I think this is the point where it's like, there's going to be a lot of use cases where that 80% is fine. Like a landing page, you don't need to use Webflow. You can use lovable.dev, make an insane looking landing page, right? Like, and maybe it's not going to be mobile optimized, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so again, right, like where is the line going to get to? And I think it'll get to like definitely past the landing page. I think you'll be able to put together a really, really robust, simple website. But I think once you start going above that, that's where you start to get into this blurred line. And I think we're going to have that for the next like year or two at least.
Yeah.
But I think again, like that line is always going to creep up. So the question then becomes, what are all the use cases that are in the 80%? What are the companies that live there? Because those are the companies that are now going to get eaten by vibe coding.
Going back to, you know, I think one of the points I made earlier, it's like the AI tool trap in that people see that they can get to 80% and assume they can get the rest of the 20%.
Yeah.
Right? And you see the revenue growth curves of some of these companies are insane, right? Like 0 to 20 million in annual revenue in 2 months is what Lovable reported. Now, there's been a lot of skepticism on Twitter, and you know I don't really have a horse in that race, but as to like how sustainable that revenue is going to be, because ultimately your revenue is determined by how sustainable are those projects, right? Because for 2 months of growth, that's insane viral growth, but you're going to have to, you know, I think they reported they had a 15% monthly churn, and you know that was in the first 2 months. It's like, what's that going to be in 6 months, right? Are those people going to sit there and go, wait, so I built a website, it's pretty good, but like I need a content management system, I need to set up a blog, I need to make this multilingual, I need, you know, X, Y, Z, and then at some point you hit that line and you don't know where that line's going to be, but you hit that line and have to move to a platform that like that's all they do. Webflow's been around for 10 years, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the question, is most people are going to fall into that trap and they don't know where the line is. And I don't either. And honestly, and for some people, it might be fine.
I think the other thing too is like, you know, the market itself is also just, the pie is just growing significantly.
Yeah.
Right. Where now it's because you can spin up a lot of these like, I'll call them like personal software, right?
Yeah.
Stuff that I would use in my day-to-day that like fills my problems, helps me with work, all these other things. I would have never looked for software to do these problems before because it just like wasn't big enough of an issue and I could do it myself. And so all of a sudden, you know, I think the market for like simple software has grown dramatically, and I think that's actually where a lot of these tools are going to thrive. I still think you'll have that spectrum where eventually you'll move up, but again, I think the market for software and software building in itself has now just exploded.
I mean, this has been, you know, when I chat with investors for Voiceflow, one of the questions I often get is like, why not just focus on a very specific vertical like customer support alone, right? And I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons as to, you know, why, you know, we do have a focus on customer support, but it's not the whole platform, right? It's not like we're a point solution. We allow you to build agents for any use case. And I think it's because the long-term time horizon is like, if we do our job well and an AI agent that is super advanced, you know, really, you know, sort of incredible experience, if that is 10 times easier to create, yes, you can do it for the use case everyone's thinking of customer support. But the more interesting thing is how can you allow a business to spin up agents that you didn't even, you know, it's a mild annoyance. Before we got into this podcast, we were chatting about the amount of emails that we get per day. And right now there's no point solution that's going in and like reading my inbox and responding to spam emails just saying I'm unsubscribed and stuff. Or maybe there is, but I don't know. But how can you make it so easy for like, that's where we both work at Voiceflow. Like that's a problem that we could just go solve, spin up an agent for in 5 minutes. And maybe it saves us 10 minutes of time.
Yeah.
But now it's like, it's that personal software, but at the workplace, right? So how do you build a platform that allows for people to spin up hundreds of agents for any use case that they want?
And I think that's what we're seeing too on the Voiceflow side, right? Is like before we had a lot of people that would come just with customer support. And now it's like the market for agents themselves, in a similar way that the market for software itself has just exploded. You have all of these like mini agents for all these different tasks. So
Yeah.
we had like a competition for building a voice agent on Voiceflow. The winner of the competition had actually built a outbound calling agent that does interview screening once you upload your resume. So you upload your resume, he's got an automated system on the back end that parses the resume, scans it based on the phone number, injects it into Voiceflow, and then it also has the ideal candidate for the role. And what it does is basically, as you call, it runs you through a series of questions, and each question actually compares your answer to the answer from the ideal candidate, and then comes out with a score, and then determines whether or not to continue in the interview.
Wow.
It was actually like incredible. I was like, I would use this myself.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because like I've seen companies that do this, like companies built that just do that, and this is something someone was able to spin up on Voiceflow in a matter of weeks.
Yeah.
To a quality that like was high enough that I'm like, I would actually implement this tomorrow inside.
Yeah.
And so I think that goes to your question. That goes to the same point too, right? Where like a lot of these like smaller problems, even within a company, are now being kind of solved by some of these like agent building platforms or like software platforms. And Voiceflow, I think, is in the same conversation of like a build versus buy, where you have like a tool that can write the code for you, whereas like for Voiceflow, at least, it's building a lot of the background automation for you.
Yeah, it kind of brings up a larger question of like, what is the future of like software platforms? Like, should you, traditionally, the advice has been like pick a niche, get rich, right? You pick a niche problem in a vertical and you build a point solution and you solve that problem and all goes well. But if it's so easy to build software now, is it pick a niche or is it build a framework that allows you to go after every niche, right? Like that's like the lovable approach, that's the cursor approach. Like Webflow does not, specialize in any one type of landing page or website. You can kind of build anything with it, right? And if it's so easy to build software, you might not have enough room for differentiation versus a build. Yeah. If you're just selling software that just does one thing.
Yeah, I think that's still building a platform, and building a platform is really hard. And then on top of that, right, like right now we have like 1 billion of these like software like AI IDEs basically, where you're going and writing the code for you. Like in 6 months, a lot of these are going to die, and you're going to have like a couple of platforms that are remaining, right? So I don't know if I would ever recommend someone do that, but I do think that like
I'm not saying everyone builds platforms. I'm more so just talking like very broad level about like. Will the point solution model survive in 10 years, or will everything have to be a platform?
I do still think like riches are in the niches is still true. I think the question is like you just have to figure out what the level of complexity is where it actually makes sense to buy something versus build it.
Yeah.
And so like I think that will still be the future of software, because at the end of the day, like you are still going to need like solutions for your problems.
Yeah.
But there's going to be a level of complexity where if you can find someone who has that problem with this complexity criteria, it doesn't make sense for them to build it themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So then the ROI is a lot higher. And that's exactly what you see even on Voiceflow today, right? Yeah. The agents that are going out there are not simple agents that people are talking to. It's agents that are doing all sorts of processing behind the scenes, have all sorts of business logic, are like highly customized. And like that's the stuff that a lot of agencies are building and selling, because you can't like just spin that up yourself.
Yeah. If we go back to the pricing part of that tweet for a sec, the reason that resolution-based pricing kind of took off, it was, all the rage in Silicon Valley for basically last year, was because it so clearly aligned the value with the value capture, right? It costs you $10 to resolve a ticket with a human today. We're going to charge you $2. This build versus buy completely changes that equation. And I think we're going to have to see one of two things. I think we might have to see completely new pricing model innovation, and it might have to go back to seats, funny enough, right? Like if the value of your software is to just go solve whatever problem you want, it's really hard to do an accurate value capture when all the problems vary, right? Like $2 a resolution maybe makes sense for an L2 ticket for a really complex customer support cost where like building that agent would be really hard, but like $2 for a super high volume e-com store might not make sense, right? Yeah. And so people might end up going back to like either a seats-based model or they do like a really low like usage-based pricing model, right? It's kind of up in the air, but like clearly I think the days are numbered for the gouging of like $2 a ticket, where build versus buy just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to kind of like wrap it as well. Yeah, because I think the last thought I have on that is too that like in this simple category, it's not necessarily that there's less customers, is that there's just like so many more competitors. So all of a sudden the value of like you paying Intercom like $1 a ticket starts to become a lot lower because, well, there's like 50 tools that are going to do this, and then it's just a race to the bottom.
We actually had a deal that we were competing for where we were, Voiceflow is an agent building platform, and the other company is a point solution for customer support. And our pricing came in, Voiceflow prices with seats and with just a base platform fee, basically on our enterprise side. The other company came in and apparently had to drop their price by half because this company was like, hold up, like I'm gonna get Voiceflow, which is a great platform. Yeah, you've got a great point solution too, but like you're twice the price. And it was because they were doing resolution-based pricing. They were selling based off value versus factoring in like the build versus buy and also the competition, right? And so I think you're probably just going to see customer support costs come down quite a bit. Had a customer last week chatting about them. They're using another different vendor. They're charging 50 cents a conversation. So even a quarter of what Jason's talking about here, and they were still frustrated with 50 cents, right? Because they were like, hey, if we just use pure AI tokens, it's going to cost us like half a penny to be able to resolve the same thing. So I think the whole pricing of the space is going to probably have to come down by like an order of magnitude.
Yeah. I just don't think resolution-based pricing actually has a lot of merit because I just think there's just so many more competitors now that it's really going to be a race to the bottom, and a lot of the value will be perceived entirely differently than what it was before.
Do you know what is funny though is the flipping of. So the things that are built with vibe coding probably can't use resolution-based pricing, but the vibe coding tools themselves are using resolution-based pricing. Replit has a great system of like checkpoints, right, where you pay like 25 cents every time it like adds a new feature that you asked it to do. If you go all the way down, it almost stops at the builder because they can do resolution-based pricing. Because without it, you have to write code and you don't know how to write code, or like you don't want to write that much code. So they can do resolution-based pricing, but if everyone can use these democratized tools, the apps built on top of them can't.
Yeah. No, maybe. I don't know.
And with that, then, that's human talking agents. We're talking about vibe coding.
We'll just have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. Thanks so much.